Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art with your presenter, Dr. Paul Anthony Taylor, a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk is Narcissism, the Origin Myth. And this is a painting of today's topic, John William Waterhouse from 1903, entitled Echo and Narcissus. And it hangs in the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool, so I've been lucky enough to see this many times. It's a beautiful large format painting. Even before his transformation into a flower, Narcissus undergoes a transformation by means of which he ceases to feel at home in the world he inhabits. He becomes, by means of his reflected image in the pool, a stranger to himself, perhaps the most profound expression of not belonging. Timothy Ambrose. Ovid's structure is not merely like a Russian doll, one story inside another. It is like a snake pit, in which a pretty indeterminable number of snakes are devouring and being devoured by one another. Hoffman and Lasden. Well, hi everybody, and regulars on the channel will be incredibly familiar with this Caravaggio depiction of Narcissus. I'm borderline obsessed with it because I just love the way the face recedes into the darkness, the chiaroscuro that Caravaggio practiced, the use of light and dark. I think it's one of the best practical uses of it in a painting. And it's emblematic for me because talking about images receding into the distance, the concept of narcissism is immensely popular online today. And good friends of mine, Richard Grannon and Darren McGee, talk about, with great success, the psychological aspects of narcissism, as Freud popularized the term. But it's always interested me that amidst this popularity of the concept, there's relatively little time ever devoted to looking back to the source, or at least one of the sources, and we'll get into, hopefully in future videos, the complexity of the literary aspects of the story. But today is just an introduction. So I'm going to read the text and intersperse it with images from across the centuries of art, because it's a story about vision amongst many things, but it's a story about representation and reflections. So it's hardly surprising that many artists over many centuries have depicted the story in various ways. So after every quote or two, I'll give you an image, and I've deliberately mixed them up so that I've tried to make them as relevant to the particular quote as possible. But that's not always possible. That's not always I'm able to do that. But also, I've deliberately chosen quite a range across time and mixed them up so they're not chronological, and hopefully they're not too jarring when they change in style. But I really wanted to give you a sense of for how long and to what range and variety of artists this theme of Narcissus and Echo has chimed with them, and how they found it fascinating. And in a second, I'll show you some images from Pompeii they found in the ruins. So in Ovid, I think he finished Metamorphoses in AD 8. And of that time and later on, but in the 1st century AD, these were the frescoes and murals that you can find in Pompeii. So pretty much contemporaneous with Ovid are some representations from that time. And I find those quite poignant in a way. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age. But as you can see, the receding face in this painting in the murky depths of the pool. These frescoes and murals from Pompeii, frozen in time with the horrific eruption of Mount Etna, they're quite faded, and it seems to me emblematic of our memories of the source material are also fading as people concentrate on the psychological definition of narcissism and why people are feeling lonely and misused by other people. And that original quote I used, one of the epigraphs, the very first quote, talking about, you know, the most extreme form of loneliness is to be alienated or separated from your very self. And in an era when, as I always say on this channel, online media, social media, the most misnamed phenomenon in human history, social media, because they're completely antisocial. But this idea that people feel alienated from the world that we've been thrown into and from ourselves, that the story of Echo and Narcissus is all about that. And that problem has never been stronger. Just strikes me as a brilliant example of how relevant classical literature is, and such a shame that most people don't expose themselves to the classics anymore. So this is my pitch for why it's all relevant, and hopefully you'll be convinced. And after we've looked at the actual text in this video, I'm going to use that as a springboard to look at all the implications and all the subtleties and nuances and immense complexity that exists in a piece of literature from 2,000 years ago. But this video is the selling one, just to try and convince you how good it is and that it's worth paying attention to. So let's see how we get on with that. So just to give some context, Ovid's Heroides, it's a collection of letters from heroines and heroes to each other. So in the one I'm going to quote you at the moment, it's in this following immediately from this, it's Leander to Hero. And it's all about, it's a technical term called paraklausothiron, which means literally lament by a door. And it's about the distance that separates lovers. And these are letters of longing because they're separated lovers that Ovid was writing about. And I think it's a type of literature of the era. It was a genre, and it perfectly fits the Echo and Narcissus story, with the added twist that Narcissus becomes alienated and separated from himself, not realizing it's himself that he desires. But I just wanted to show you an example of this literary form that I hope will provide some useful context for the whole Echo and Narcissus story. You are worthy of heaven, but stay a while on earth, or tell me how I too might journey to the gods. You are here, but rarely available to your unhappy lover, and the sea shares the turmoil of my mind. What good is it that I am not separated by a broad ocean? Is so narrow a stretch of water any less an obstacle? I don't know that I wouldn't rather be far away on the other side of the world, with my mistress as remote as my hope. As it is, the nearer you are, the nearer the flame that burns me. The object of my love is not always with me, but hope is always with me. I can almost touch with my hand what I love, so close it is. But, alas, that word almost often moves me to tears. What is it but to reach for apples that elude the grasp, or to strain with one's lips for a river that shrinks away? So that last bit's an obvious reference to the myth of Tantalus, where we get the English word tantalizing. But I just think this idea that I could almost touch with my hand what I love, it's, you can see from the painting, Narcissus trying to touch his own reflection. And it's a psychological aspect. One of the reasons the Narcissus myth was adopted by Freud is this concept of desire, and how desire is a relational notion. So distance is implied in desire. You desire the things you can't have because they're at a distance from you. And sometimes things can be, as in this poem, things can be incredibly close but yet frustratingly distant. And that is a real encapsulation of the curse that afflicts Narcissus. But this is what I referred to. It's the technical concept for this is paraklausothiron. Literally means lament beside a door. Paraklausothiron. And this is added context that's very important. Is interestingly, Ovid, shortly after he finished the Metamorphoses, was exiled by Emperor Augustus. So this is a painting depicting Ovid's exile. So Ovid was, as most Romans of the time, Rome was the center of the universe. So ironically, after writing stories like Metamorphoses and the story of Echo and Narcissus that deals with psychological distance and desire, in his own life, he was then led to be in exile, which led him to write poems, as you've just heard, about distance. But it was a literary genre, the paraklosothyron, that the notion of you're so close to something. And I'm trying to remember, was it Midsummer's Night's Dream by Shakespeare? The play within a play, the rude mechanicals, Pyramus and Thisbe are being played by the country bumpkins. And I think, is it Tom Snout acts as the wall that separates Pyramus and Thisbe. So it's a great comic effect. But it's a recognised literary form, which is fascinating because, like I say, given that desire is relational, it was embodied within a literary form of 2,000 years ago. They had very sophisticated ways of dealing with the type of issues we still struggle with today, with a lot less literacy. But the image, 1838 from Turner. But just to give you some more context of Ovid's time before I go dive into the actual text, this is the phrase in Latin, novitasque furoris, that there are various interpretations of how you would translate that into English. But this is the state that Narcissus is put into. Strange frenzy, or you could call it madness or insanity. And the relevance of that to your average dopamine fix screen addict of today just strikes me, very, very topical. And then one thing that's different in classical times is they had this theory of intromission and extramission when it came to vision. So the idea was sight was thought of as a much more tactile property. So the two theories were either that objects gave off particles that entered our eyes, so they penetrate your eyes, or alternatively, the other theory was that human eyes lit up the objects they looked at. So it was different conceptions of whether you were penetrated by the object being looked at or you were doing the penetrating, which I will get onto on a future date, has quite complex psychological, psychosexual connotations that the Romans were very, very aware of. But sight was, just to repeat, sight was a much more tactile notion for the ancient Romans, which I don't think we think of as much. Again, we spend our lives on screens. There's a surface level that's much more dominant in our society. And yet, the way in which you saw in the Caravaggio painting, Narcissus plays with the surface because the surface is the very thing that reflects his image back to himself. But the minute he actually touches it, as you would with water, the image disperses. It's muddied, so he can't see himself. So that is just a brilliant encapsulation of the paradox of desire. The minute you actually get to touch the thing you thought you desired, often it disappears. And then the idea of textual reflections in the actual poem. Remember, the overarching image of the poem is the excerpt of Metamorphoses, the story of Echo and Narcissus. It's Narcissus seeing himself reflected. But within the text, there are these literary techniques whereby reflection happens in various forms, which is incredibly sophisticated. And today I'm just going to give you a hint, because I am now going to go into the actual poem. But just before I do, I just wanted to give you a hint of hopefully what you'll find interesting in future as I go into a lot more depth. But just to give you a taster, antimetabole. I am just having trouble pronouncing things these days. I think I've had an undiagnosed stroke or something. Antimetabole. It's this, you have an order of words and then it's followed by the reverse order of those same words. So I know what I like and I like what I know. When people talk about art, ironically enough, that would be an example. But it's present in Ovid's work, which is a verbal way of reflecting the theme of visual reflections. It's really clever the way he does it. Anaphora is the repetition of a word. So again, you can think of that as a reflection. An antithesis, the use of opposites. In other words, things reflecting the opposite of the original idea, which again relates to this idea of visual reflection. For example, the opposite between the body of Narcissus that's substantial and the evanescence of his reflection. They're opposites, but it's also what's being described in the story. So to give you some examples of what I've just mentioned, antimetabole. So this is a line 379, and I won't go into the depths of it, but it's Narcissus basically saying, is anyone here? And all Echo can do is repeat the last word spoken to her. So she says, and here, replies Echo. So it's not a pure form, but it gives you the sense of these verbal reflections within the text. And the fact Echo, the idea of, the myth of Echo, someone who can only repeat what you say, is obviously a audio reflection rather than a visual reflection. And then you have these examples of anaphora and antithesis. Put my teeth back in. So this is the English translation. Boys and girls both sought his love, but in that slender stripling was pride so fierce, no boy, no girl could touch him. And if you look at the Latin, I was never trained, or I've never studied Latin, so anything I know is self-taught, so please take everything I say with a massive pinch of salt. But it's basically saying many young youths, which was normally used to refer to boys, and many girls wanted him. But you can see how it's the repetition of multi and multe. Juvenes for boys and puellae for girls. And then at the top it says multi, on the last line it says nulli, so many and none, which is a contrast. So both horizontally and vertically. At the top, multi, nulli. This is what I'm talking about, reflections. It might seem very technical, but the idea that, we've progressed and they were ancient, rudimentary people. It's almost in linguistic terms, it's the opposite. This is the complexity of what goes on in Ovid. Compare that to your modern text message that most people spend their time reading 24/7. But I'm just making the point, belabored as it might be, apologies, that these are the congruence between the theme of the story and the mode in which the story is told. They're beautifully entwined. Remember the early quote about like snakes devouring each other? It's not just within the story that the stories devour each other. It's the way in which the text is written encapsulates some of the themes being described, so that it's almost like a process of eating itself as the story is being told. It's just beautifully done. And then I did mention I must, like I say, must be getting soft in my old age, but I just find them really poignant, these like ghostly, reflections from the past. You can see the reflection there at the bottom. Again, just a fragment. Now, if I was going to get all maudlin, I'd point out that all we've got are these fragments from the past in physical terms. But sadly, all we've got is fragments of understanding of the actual text, because people don't read anymore and because our culture's lost touch with the classics. This isn't going to be a cheery one, is it? And then if anyone's thinking of having a bathroom renovation, some design ideas for you. But admittedly, it was a tiny percentage of the population who got to live like this. But if you were going to, you know, in all human history of things, of times to have been born, that if you were privileged enough to be one of the aristocracy, given how long ago it was, they didn't do badly for themselves, did they? You're lying in warm pools all day looking at beautiful art, as opposed to your local public baths, chlorinated to the more chlorinated than your average American chicken. Sorry, that's a bit of a topical reference given the trade deal going on at the moment. I would like to point out that I don't think the glass and corrugated iron at the top is of the time. Bit of an obvious point, but I thought I should just make it. Right, so just to dive straight into the text now, enough of a preamble. And so Tiresias, famous through all the Aeonian towns and cities, gave irreproachable answers to all comers who sought his guidance. One of the first who tested the truths he told was a naiad of the river, Liriope, whom the river god Cephissus embraced and ravished in his watery dwelling. In time she bore a child, most beautiful, even as child gave him the name Narcissus. And asked Tiresias if the boy would ever live to a ripe old age. Tiresias answered, yes, if he never knows himself. How silly those words seemed, for how long. But as it happened, time proved them true. The way he died, the strangeness of his infatuation. And I apologise for the next one, it's just my warped sense of humour. And I quickly got the title on just to show I wasn't being gross for the sake of it. Christian Shad obviously had a good sense of humour. Now Narcissus was 16 years of age and could be taken either for boy or man, and boys and girls both sought his love. But in that slender stripling was pride so fierce, no boy, no girl could touch him. He was out hunting one day, driving deer into the nets, when a nymph named Echo saw him, a nymph whose way of talking was peculiar in that she could not start a conversation nor fail to answer other people talking. Up to this time, Echo still had a body. She was not merely voice. She liked to chatter, but had no power of speech except the power to answer in the words she had last heard. Juno had done this when she went out looking for Jove on top of some nymph among the mountains. Echo would stall the goddess off by talking until the nymphs had fled. Sooner or later, Juno discovered this and said to Echo, "The tongue that made a fool of me will shortly have shorter use, the voice be brief hereafter." Those were not idle words. Now Echo always says the last thing she hears, and nothing further. She saw Narcissus roaming through the country, saw him and burned, and followed him in secret. Burning the moor she followed, as when sulphur smeared on the rim of torches catches fire when other fire comes near it. Oh, how often she wanted to come near with coaxing speeches, make soft entreaties to him, but her nature sternly forbids. The one thing not forbidden is to make answers. She's more than ready for words she can give back. By chance, Narcissus lost track of his companions, started calling. "Is anybody here?" And "Here," said Echo. He looked around in wonderment, called louder. "Come to me, come to me," came back the answer. He looked behind him and saw no one coming. "Why do you run from me?" And heard his question repeated in the woods. "Let us get together." There was nothing Echo would ever say more gladly. Let us get together. And to help her words, out of the woods she came, with arms all ready to fling around his neck, but he retreated. "Keep your hands off," he cried, "and do not touch me. I would die before I give you a chance at me. I give you a chance at me." And that was all she ever said thereafter, spurned and hiding, ashamed in the leafy forests, in lonely caverns. But still her love clings to her and increases and grows on suffering. She cannot sleep, she frets and pines, becomes all gaunt and haggard. Her body dries and shrivels till voice only, and bones remain, and then she is voice only. For the bones are turned to stone. She hides in woods, and no one sees her now along the mountains, but all may hear her, for her voice is living. She was not the only one on whom Narcissus had visited frustration. There were others, naiads or oreads, and young men also, till finally one rejected youth, in prayer, raised up his hands to heaven. May Narcissus love one day so himself, and not win over the creature whom he loves. Nemesis heard him, goddess of vengeance, and judged the plea was righteous. There was a pool, silver with shining water, to which no shepherds came, no goats, no cattle, whose glass no bird, no beast, no falling leaf had ever troubled. Grass grew all around it, green from the nearby water, and with shadow no sun burned hotly down on. Here Narcissus, worn from the heat of hunting, came to rest, finding the place so delightful, and the spring refreshing for the thirsty, as he tried. To quench his thirst, inside him, deep within him, another thirst was growing, for he saw an image in the pool, and fell in love with that embodied hope, and found a substance in what was only shadow. He looks in wonder, charmed by himself, spellbound, and no more moving than any marble statue. Lying prone, he sees his eyes, twin stars, and locks as comely as those of Bacchus or the god Apollo. Smooth cheeks, an ivory neck, and the bright beauty of countenance, and a flush of colour rising in the fair whiteness. Everything attracts him that makes him so attractive. Foolish boy, he wants himself. The loved becomes the lover, the seeker sought, the kindler burns. How often he tries to kiss the image in the water, dips in his arms to embrace the boy he sees there, and finds the boy, himself, elusive always, not knowing what he sees, but burning for it. The same delusion mocking his eyes and teasing. Why try to catch an always fleeing image? Poor credulous youngster, what you seek is nowhere, and if you turn away, you will take with you the boy you love. The vision is only shadow, only reflection, lacking any substance. It comes with you, it stays with you, it goes away with you if you can go away. No thought of food, no thought of rest can make him forsake the place. Stretched on the grass, in shadow, he watches, all unsatisfied, that image vain and elusive, and he almost drowns in his own watching eyes. He rises just a little, enough to lift his arms in supplication. To the trees around him, crying to the forest, What love, whose love, has ever been more cruel? You woods should know, you have given many lovers places to meet and hide in. Has there ever through the long centuries been anyone who has pined away as I do? He is charming, I see him, but the charm and sight escape me. I love him, and I cannot seem to find him. To make it worse, no sea, no road, no mountain, no city wall, no gate, no barrier parts us, but a thin film of water. He is eager for me to hold him. When my lips go down to kiss the pool, his rise, he reaches toward me. You would think that I could touch him. Almost nothing keeps us apart. Come out, whoever you are. Why do you tease me so? Where do you go when I am reaching for you? I am surely neither so old or ugly as to scare you. And nymphs have been in love with me. You promise, I think, some hope with a look of more than friendship. You reach out arms when I do, and your smile follows my smiling. I have seen your tears when I was tearful. You nod and beckon when I do. Your lips, it seems, answer when I am talking, though what you say I cannot hear. I know the truth at last. He is myself. I feel it. I know my image now. I burn with love of my own self. I start the fire I suffer. What shall I do? Shall I give or take the asking? What shall I ask for? What I want is mine. My riches make me poor. If I could only escape from my own body, if I could only, how curious a prayer from any lover, be parted from my love. And now my sorrow is taking all my strength away. I know I have not long to live. I shall die early. And death is not so terrible, since it takes my trouble from me. I am sorry only the boy I love must die. We die together. He turned again to the image in the water, seeing it blur through tears and the vision fading. And as he saw it vanish, he called after, "Where are you going? Stay, do not desert me. I love you so, I cannot touch you. Let me keep looking at you always, and in looking nourish my wretched passion." In his grief, he tore his garment from the upper margin, beat his bare breasts with hands as pale as marble. And the breast took on a glow as rosy colour, as apples are white and red, and sometimes, or grapes can be both green and purple. The water clears, he sees it all once more and cannot bear it, as yellow wax dissolves with warmth around it, as the white frost is gone in the morning sunshine. Narcissus, in the hidden fire of passion, wanes slowly, with the ruddy colour going, the strength and hardihood and comeliness fading away, and even the very body Echo had loved. She was sorry for him now. Though angry still, remembering, you could hear her answer, alas, in pity, when Narcissus cried out, alas. You could hear her own hands beating her breast when he beat his. Farewell, dear boy, beloved in vain, were his last words. An echo called the same words to him. His weary head sank to the greensward, and death closed the eyes that once had marvelled at their owner's beauty. And even in hell he found a pool to gaze in, watching his image in the Stygian water. While in the world above his naiad sisters mourned him, and dryads wept for him, an echo mourned as they did, and wept with them, preparing the funeral pyre, the bier, the brandished torches. But when they sought his body, they found nothing, only a flower with a yellow centre, surrounded with white petals. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and there'll be plenty more on Narcissus to come. You might not be glad to hear. So all the very best. Take care.